Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I create this 3-drop twisted herringbone rope and show you the difference between 1-drop, 3-drop, how to add your ends, and how to even add some beads in between. Go ahead and gather up your materials listed below or on the side and get ready to have fun doing some herringbone rope. So just like the name, we're going to be using 3-drop or picking up 3 beads at a time for each 1 bead normally during this twisted herringbone. You can see how kind of slowly it twists when you do a 1 bead rotation at a time. And we're going to force this twist to happen faster by doing multiple beads. And I'll explain as we're doing it why that's occurring and why more beads are going to make it twist faster. We're also going to be putting about every half an inch or so one of these little 2mm cute crystals inside. To begin, I have some dragon thread and I have the gray. You can use gray or green with these colors. And I have the size 6 dragon thread. And we are going to begin with ladder stitch. We're going to come back and add in our clasp after the fact, and I'll show you how we're going to kind of cinch those ends together. But to begin, we are going to pick up 1, 2, and 3 of our blue beads, another 3 blue beads, and we are going to ladder stitch those together as 3 next to 3. So I'm going to take these here. So back up through your original 3 towards the second 3 and let those lay next to one another. From here, I'm going to sew through the 3 I just added, and we're going to get ready to add our next 3. Our next 3 will consist of the beige color, and we're going to go into the opposite side that our thread is coming out of those 311 Toho beads, and the 3 we just added will sit right next to those. From here, I want you to go back through those 3 that you just added, and your needle will come out towards the top. From here, our next row is going to be our almond color, 3 more beads, sew into the opposite end, the way that the thread is coming out, and then once again, sew through the 3 beads that you just added. From here, do another row of your almond, going into the opposite side, coming back up here through those 3 beads. And then we're going to finish up with 1 more row of our beige color. Once we're done this row of beige, we're going to round this into a tube. So how we're going to do that is instead of going in and creating another row of beads, we are going to link back to our first row of beads. So coming out this last group of 3 beige beads, I want you to roll the project in on itself. See how it's kind of rolling there? My thread's coming out of the bottom of the beige beads. It's going to go into the bottom of those comet beads, the metallic comet. Thread's coming out the top. Go back through the beige beads, just like you were doing. From here, complete the ladder stitch going through our first row and up towards the stop, or up towards the top, away from the stop bead. This is how we are going to start the process of herringbone stitch. There's a lot of different ways to start herringbone, and this is the one that I find the easiest and gets us set up ready to go. So we've got our groups of 3 beads there, and we have 3 units of 2. We are going to look at our blue as one of our herringbone unit, a beige and almond as a second herringbone unit, and an almond and beige as our third herringbone unit that we are going to add into. Normally when you do herringbone stitch, you come up 1 bead, you add 2 beads, you go down the second bead that's already there. Instead of adding 2 beads in the middle, we're tripling it. So we're going to add 6 beads in the middle. I have 3 on. I'm going to add 1, 2, 3 more. Going down through that second row of 3, these 6 beads will sit in 2 rows of 3 side by side, almost looking like a little loop. Coming up then to our next row, which is our beige and our almond, we're going to come up the first row of this second group of herringbone, adding 3 more beige, and then the 3 almond beads. Go down through your almond side. And that makes your second little loop. Spinning over, we're going to go up through our next group of 2, coming out the top of an almond bead, adding 3 almonds. So we're always adding the same color that our thread is coming out of. And then I add the color that my thread is going to go into. And down through those 3 almond beads. Once you're there, normally what we would do is step up to do our next row. The step up to the next row is normally going to be, if you want it to be straight lines and not twisted, you're going to sew every time you get back to the blue section up the last 2 rows, which in our case is 2 rows of 3, so up through 6 beads. Instead, we are not going to step up. We're just going to continue. We're going to hop over these first 3 blue beads, and we're going to sew up through our second group of blue beads. You'll see some thread. Don't worry about it. We'll correct that as we go in and finish off the piece. That's going to pull that down towards that original group, of 3 beads. You'll notice already now it's starting to twist. From here, coming out those 3 blue beads, I'm going to add 3 more blue, and yet again, 3 more blue. 3 up, 3 down, and then I'm sewing down through the last 3 beads of that blue unit. Always sewing down through 3 beads, always sewing up through 3 beads. Sew down, go over to the next area, sew up through those last 3 beads, add 3 and 3 more to do your 6 beads. Sew down through the 3 beads of the almond from the last row that we just completed. I'll bend those over. Going to your third column of your herringbone stitch, sew up through those 3 almond beads. Once you're out there, that links the 2 rows together. We're going to add 3 of our almond beads. We're going to add 3 of our beige. We're going to sew down through 3 beige beads. Once you have that, you're going over to the next spot. You can see naturally it wants you to line up that you sew through the 6 beads. Ignore that temptation. It'll start to turn more, so it won't be as drastic that you'll see that thread. And you're going to sew up through just the last 3 blue beads. Once you start doing this little by little, you will see less and less of that thread as that turn starts to occur. 3 more beads go on, 3 for the going up, 3 for going down. Go down through the last 3 blue beads, turning in your hand, up through the last 3 beige. And the color variety is nice on the 2 other rows of herringbone because you know exactly which beads are the 3 beads. 3 beige coming out of there, 3 more almond, down through the almond 3, and out. And then you go over to the next row, give a nice tight pull there, go over to the next row and sew up through those 3 almond. If you do not know herringbone stitch and the single 1 drop, I would suggest watching the paintbrush necklace. That's a great one to help you get started on a tubular herringbone. From here, after adding the 6 beads, go down through the beige, resisting that temptation to go through all 6. Just go through the last 3 beads. 1, 2, 3, going towards the top. Once again, give that nice tight pull and see how that turn is already starting to occur. We're going to do this for 5 more rows, and then we'll get ready to start adding in some of our 2mm crystals for just that little hint of shine. As you're continuing to make, you can see that this twist is happening a lot faster than this twist here. Why? That is the difference between doing a single bead where you're doing up 1 bead, 2 beads on down, so you only have 1 bead high each row, versus the 3 beads high. Now that you're a couple of rows past, as you go in and do your last kind of side here before getting back to that blue section here, normally you only increase through and hop up 1 bead in the row. Here we're increasing and hopping up the space of 3 beads, basically, because we're not going through 6, we're just going through the last 3. So that difference of hopping up basically 3 beads versus 1 is what's increasing that twist rate. And that's why it's twisting faster when you do the multi-drop versus the single drop. I'm going to continue around here, and we're going to get ready then. I'm going to show you how to add in your crystals if you so want to. You don't have to add in the crystals, that's up to you. As you progress also, it's easier and easier to hold, to see what's going on. And if you doubted yourself previously, usually by the time you get to about this length here, about an inch or so, you can say, all right, I've got it, I know what I'm doing. And you will at some point definitely have to add thread, because this technique, anything tubular, uses a ton of thread. So when we get to it, I'll show you how we're going to go in and add some thread and where I think thread is best added. So here I'm getting ready to come down through my 3 beads, going up the beige, coming down the almond. And we're going to get ready now to add in one of our crystals. I'm choosing to use the 2mm crystals. And we're just going to put them every, like I said, ½ inch or so, just a couple on the piece. I'm going to make mine about 18 inches total. And you'll notice I've skipped the first inch, and what's going to be about 1.5 inches. I'm adding a 2mm bead between my 2 rows of my herringbone beads. The herringbone rows. So I'm coming out of those 3 beads that I just went down. I'm going up through the next 3 beads, connecting those 2 rows together. And simply in between, I am adding one of my 2mm beads. That's it. I'm going to sew through more rows now, adding more height to each column is the way to think about it. And as you're going around here then, once you get, 10 stitches or so high, another probably 30 beads up, and go ahead and do the exact same thing, adding some 2mm beads, 1 row of 2mm beads between. When you come back around here, I just want to show you that nothing has changed. It's just that simple little step of adding in that 2mm bead between your columns of your herringbone stitch. Because you're thinking about it basically as you having 3 columns of herringbone stitch, your blue column, your beige and almond column, and then your almond and beige column. So going in here, we're back to the spot where previously I added the 2mm. We're going to go down through the 3, or you can bling it up more if you want, down through your 3 beads like normal. And guess what? We just continue over, going through the last 3 almond, coming back up to connect our columns, and it just closes up right around and makes it almost appear to be a little eye in the middle of our herringbone stitch. Again, about every ½ inch to 1 inch, you can determine the length of stitches that you want to separate out, but I would make it consistent to whatever you want to do. I like just that little tiny hint every ½ inch or so of those crystals popping in to do a little bit of light on your rope. So you've got lots of beading to do as we spiral around. One thing to pay attention to is your tension. You want to make sure that you maintain tension the whole time you're spiraling around this 3-step or 3-drop herringbone rope with crystals. We'll add that little with crystals in. If you do change up the pattern, make sure to include that in the comment section below the video on YouTube. And that helps out other beaders that may be looking to learn as well. So you can see that pretty rope twist happening, those beads right in the middle, and we're just gonna continue on building and building for another 16 inches. So as you progress, like I said, you are going to need to add thread. Now, if you started with 5 feet, you still have a couple more inches in your project before you actually need to add thread. Mine, I would start with less just because it makes it easier for camera purposes. I'm coming out of the blue row here. I'm using that color and doing the connection there because the blue is the closest to my thread color. I'm going to take a new piece of thread and I'm going to tie it around my piece that has the needle already attached. What that's going to allow me to do is to get that piece and slide that needle while I pull the two ends as close as possible to that blue bead. I'm then going to take the end with the needle and I'm going to tie those two thread ends together, the new thread and the thread that I've already been using. From here, I'm going to pick up my new thread, go in and get ready to do my next little turn here, needing, of course, one more blue bead to do so. Adding on my 6 beads, and then going down my row of 3. Continuing on like normal, going in then and over and up the last 3 beige beads, and life is the exact same, going in just with a new piece of thread. The older piece of thread, what I will do right there where the knot is I'll sew down a little bit into my stitch there, going right down along the blue row till my needle pops out. I'm then going to burn off that thread end for my new piece of thread, close to the project, flip it over, take the one that is connected that I just used and burn that thread end, taking off the needle further down the project. Usually that little burn there will be big enough that, again, you want to keep along the blue so you don't see the thread. And we're back to progressing through the piece just as normal with a new piece of thread on my needle. Once you finish with your rope, whether or not you make it 16, 18, 19 inches, you're going to want to close up that rope and make it so that it has a nice finished end. And we're putting a lobster with a wire guard on. The reason I'm doing the lobster clasp is because you have the opportunity to make something really cool to put onto the rope. So you don't want your clasp to be huge. You can make something like this beautiful pendant here, the Herringbone Crystal Revolvi pendant. Slide that onto the rope, and you also can slide it off the rope if you have a nice small clasp. So I'm going to show you how we're going to go in after finishing up this row here and get ready to close up the ends. At the top of the herringbone, so we have our 3 little sections, which as you've been doing it, you know they go into that Y. They'll come back together again as we go in and connect this last step. So the last step is going to be to add 1 of your 11-0 and then come down through the last 3 beads of the herringbone row. Like we've been doing, rotate over, go up through, again, always those last 3 beads of the next herringbone grouping. Coming out of there, add the color your thread is coming out of, 1 bead, and then sew down through the next 3 beads. On to the next, spinning that around, go over here and up through your next row of your herringbone through the next 3 beads. When you get to the top, again, add 1 bead and sew down through those 3 herringbone beads on the second side of that row. Now we are going to get ready to close this up. Because we're twisting it, they're not going to line up exactly, but we're going to force them to. So just like we've been doing, we are going to go up through the last 3 beads of the herringbone row to kind of close that up together. And see, that's going to pull them over just a tiny little bit. I'm then going to sew through bead number 1 of that herringbone bead. So let's bring us a little bit closer and show this in a little bit more detail. Right here, I'm going through bead 1 because at the top of all of these herringbone rows, we just added 1 bead. Go through bead number 1 in your blue row, bead number 1 in your second row, and bead number 1 in your third row. Back through bead number 1 from your first blue row. So it's almost like a triangle that you're connecting. And see how that just pulls it closed right away. Like right away, your rope is closed. So from here, we're going to open up our little lobster pack here. I'm going to choose to use gold, silver, kind of up to you. I'm going to grab a gold wire guard. First, what I'm going to do is get back. So I'm coming out through the bead that sits at the top, which is going to be that last row, that little gold one there. Adding on a gold wire guard, we're going to go up through the wire guard, down through the wire guard on the other side, put on your lobster clasp or your ring, up to you. We're going to go sew through that section there. Let that lobster clasp go right on to your wire guard. That's the way it's going to hang out in the middle there. And this protects the thread from rubbing against the clasp. Then we're going to go back in to that last gold bead from the opposite side. So we're coming out one side, we go into the other side. Bring the needle and thread around. It's just going to sit right at the end there. We're going to reinforce going up through the wire guard. Always want to do at least 2 threads going through the clasp. Just hang out in the middle there, down through the other side of the wire guard. And as you come out through that other side of the wire guard there, going through that little tube section, you're going to make sure then that we go back through that last bead. And pull tight. You don't want to see any extra wire, so that last little pull will straighten that out. That lobster hangs out right at the end. And we're going to sew down through the project then to get rid of our thread. And just go over and up. See where your thread lines up? And just kind of go over and up. Down through a little bit. And we're going to knot off our thread. Going underneath the bridge thread there. Making a loop, going through once. Going through twice, making sure that knot goes between our beads. We're going to pull that knot slowly and get that knot in there really tight. Sew down, a little further into the project, and then burn off your thread end. Burning off the thread end, you can see I've left a fairly long tail, because I know I'm not going to be able to see it, and I'm burning it straight down towards my beads. And that finishes up the end. Going back to the other side now to finish up our starter end, we're going to add a bead. So just like we've been doing, we're going to take a bead and we are going to add it in between our rows of our herringbone, sewing down through that first original. So we're going to make the ends match, adding 1 bead between that row of herringbone, coming back up through those last 3 beads, adding the cream one, going down through the 3 beads on the other side, adding those herringbone rows, going up through the gold, that beautiful almond color. Same thing here, add the almond, and then sew down through the other row. Just like we did on the other side then, we're going to sew up, and we are going to connect to all 3 of these beads that we just added at the end. Once we sew around, connect, we're going to grab our next wire guard. And this time, instead of putting on the lobster, we're going to put on the ring, repeat the same thing, burn our thread off, and finish our end. Once you put those clasps on either end, then you have your opportunity to have your rope finished. And because we did that 3-step, it has that great twist to it, adding in just that little sparkle of diamonds every once in a while from the crystals, versus remember that 1 step up and doing that single where the twist is not as great. So you can see those two different versions of the single versus the triple and how much more that triple or that 3-drop is going to be affected. Once you get that done, that nice simple little end, you can slide on your bail if you want to from any pendant like this herringbone crystal Rivoli bezel, which looks great because it uses the same materials from the rope as the actual charm. So stay tuned to put those two things together. 2 different videos we're working on for you. Thanks so much for joining me in creating this herringbone rope. Remember, if you need any materials, check out the new Potomac kit box, as well as the individual materials that you can purchase from our site with links below the video. Thanks so much for joining in. Hopefully you enjoy all the techniques learning this twisted herringbone rope, and stay tuned for more inspirational designs from us here at Potomac Beads.